All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most mysterious and, I think, prophetic appointed times in the entire biblical calendar, the Feast of Trumpets. It's this day that's just shrouded in mystery, and it has an echo that you can hear all the way from the ancient wilderness to a future that's still to come. So let's just jump right into the big puzzle. The biblical feasts were all set on very specific days. Passover, Pentecost, they had a fixed date. But the Feast of Trumpets? It was different. It was an appointed time, for sure, but nobody knew the exact day or hour it would actually start. So how is that even possible? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. You see, the story here doesn't actually start with a feast. It starts with a very specific instruction given to Moses out in the wilderness. And it's right there, in the middle of the desert, that we find the real origin of the trumpets and the key to what they're ultimately all about. Let's just quickly get the lay of the land here. So, about a year after leaving Egypt, the tabernacle is finally built. Then, a month later, Israel starts its long journey towards the Promised Land. And then just a few months after that, right while those 12 spies are out scouting the land of Canaan, God gives this very specific command to make 2 silver trumpets. Now, at first, the whole purpose for these trumpets was, surprisingly practical. They were basically a divine communication system. 1 blast, and all the leaders were supposed to assemble. 2 blasts, and the entire congregation had to gather. It was all about order and movement and summons. But, like with so many things from this time, there was a much deeper prophetic layer being put into place. Yeah, that practical call to gather together in the wilderness, it was way more than just a tool to get everyone organized. It was really a shadow, a blueprint of a much, much greater summons that was yet to come. The historical event was setting the stage for a huge future prophetic fulfillment. And the Hebrew name for the feast, well, it gives us a massive clue. Yom Teruah. It doesn't just mean Day of Trumpets. A better translation is the Day of the Awakening Blast. You see how that name points away from a simple get-together and towards something way more dramatic? An awakening. And this brings us right back to our original puzzle. Why was the timing so uncertain? Well, it's because the feast started on the first day of the 7th month, which is always a new moon. Now, unlike a full moon, the very beginning of the new moon, that first tiny little sliver of light, had to be visually confirmed by witnesses. So if the sky was cloudy, the official declaration could actually be delayed by a whole day. So every single year, people would just watch and wait, kind of like a watchman on a wall, totally uncertain of the exact moment the feast would be officially proclaimed. Now, knowing that gives some powerful context to one of the most famous phrases in the New Testament, "You do not know the day nor the hour." That wasn't just some generic warning about being unprepared. It was actually a well-known Hebrew saying that was specifically used for the Feast of Trumpets, precisely because nobody knew when it would start until the very last minute. It was a call to always be watchful. So let's put it all together. The historical trumpet that gathered Israel there in the desert was really a physical foreshadowing of a final, ultimate trumpet blast, one that would gather God's people in a way that is just far more profound. And right here, we see the fulfillment. The Apostle Paul connects the trumpet of God directly to the very first event of Christ's second coming, the resurrection of the dead. That awakening blast of Yom Teruah finds its ultimate meaning in this very moment. It's not just about summoning the living, but about awakening the dead. But this brings up a huge question, one that people have been debating for thousands of years. I mean, if the spirit goes on after death, why would we need to come back to a physical body? Isn't that kind of like a step backward? Well, the answer is found in this fundamental disagreement between 2 ancient worldviews. To really get why a bodily resurrection is so important, we have to understand this foundational conflict between the Hebrew and the Greek ways of looking at the physical world itself. And the contrast here is just stark. In the Hebrew worldview, which is rooted in Genesis, God creates physical matter, light, water, earth, bodies, and he repeatedly calls it good. And then he finishes by calling it very good. Matter isn't some mistake. It's the intended stage for his whole plan. But the Greek worldview, which later influenced a lot of Western thought, saw things really differently. For them, the spirit was pure, but matter was corrupt, a prison for the soul. And so death, for them, was a welcome escape. The Bible offers its ultimate rebuttal to that Greek idea with this incredibly profound statement. The idea that God himself would take on physical flesh is probably the strongest possible statement you can make, that matter is not inherently evil. In fact, it's just the opposite. It can be the very dwelling place of the divine.
So really, it all comes down to this. If you believe creation was a very good masterpiece from the get-go, then the end goal of all of history isn't to escape from it, but to restore it. How you see Genesis fundamentally shapes how you see Revelation.
And this brings us to the grand purpose behind that trumpet blast. It isn't about escaping creation. It's about kicking off its ultimate restoration and fulfillment.
So let's just break down the purpose of this awakening blast. First, the trumpet sounds the call. Second, the dead are re-embodied. They're given new physical forms that aren't subject to decay anymore, but are perfected. And third, God's original intention for creation is finally realized, as the spiritual and the physical become perfectly and eternally united. So when you look at the big picture, the Feast of Trumpets is so much more than some old ceremony with silver horns. It's a living prophecy. It's a yearly reminder that all of history is heading towards a great awakening and the complete restoration of God's very good creation.
And that grand restoration, that re-embodying of the resurrected, it sets the stage perfectly for the very next autumn feast. So what happens after the awakening? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore in our next explainer on the Day of Atonement. We'll see you then.